Great. So yes, welcome everybody. I'm Almut and I work for Biofuel Watch. Welcome to this webinar, which is jointly organized by Biofuel Watch and the Environmental Paper Network, specifically the Biomass that network's Biomass working group. What we'll be hearing today are presentations about the links between the pulp and paper industry and the burning of wood for energy, and specifically how pulp and paper companies are diversifying into burning more and more wood for energy in different countries. Slightly different situations in the three, as you'll hear, but you know, big concerns in the three countries we'll hear from. The first one from Sweden, second one from Finland, and the final one from Portugal. Just briefly to say, the full research regarding Portugal is finalized, and we can put the link into the chat in a bit. The research into what's happening in Sweden and Finland is work in progress and will be published in coming months. Yeah, it's a interim insights and findings right now. What we'll do is we'll have the three presentations. If you have any technical questions, things you didn't understand, you can ask it after each presentation. Otherwise, any questions about the contents or comments or so, we'll do that at the end. And finally, before I hand over to our first speaker, just for in terms of the terminology being used, just so everybody's on the same page. When we are speaking about primary wood, we mean forest wood, so anything that comes directly from the forest before it's burnt. I mean, maybe it's returned to wood chips and pellets before being burnt, but it hasn't been used anywhere else. If we speak of secondary wood, that's also called sawmill residues or wood products industry residues. And then we've got the byproducts of the pulp mills themselves, and there can be bark, and they can also be black liquor, which is just a byproduct that's traditionally being used for energy in the pulp mill. So just so you know, everybody got the terminology. And the first speaker I'm handing over now to is Marina Ilaria. Marina is a member of the board of Protect the Forest Sweden, or Skydda Skoken. And she's also been involved in other separate forest campaigning. And she's speaking here as an independent researcher into this topic. So, Marina.
Thank you. Sharing my screen. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Great. Okay, thank you. I'm gonna lower you down there. Okay. So yeah, I'm going to talk about specifically around one company, which is Svenska Cellulosa Aktiebolaget, SCA. So SCA is Europe's major private forest owner and owns 2.6 million hectares of forests within the Swedish nation state. All of SCA's forests are located in Sápmi, the indigenous Sami people's land. SCA also owns forests in Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. And also it's important to mention that forests might mean plantations as well, mostly plantations. SCA also imports substantial amounts of wood supplies. Up to 30% of the biomass that SCA harvest from forest is burned for energy or turned into wood pellets. Yes, so shortly about SCA's facilities. 2 pulp mills, Östrand and Ortvikens. There are 2 paper mills, Obbola and Munksund. In the photographs, you can see the paper mill in Munksund. And next to that mill, the paper mill, there is also the sawmill in Munksund. So in addition, there are 4 more sawmills, Bollsta, Tundal, Rundvik, and Gällö. And then SCA also has an essential, like a lot of wind production, and all of that is located in Sapmi. So in 2022, SCA used 9 terawatt-hour, equivalent to 9,000 gigawatt-hour of bioenergy in its own pulp and sawmill facilities. This is the fuel input. It's still a large demand. SCA does not specify how much of this is black liquor and how much is solid wood. In 2022, SCA sold 400 gigawatt-hour of electricity to external customers. And this is the equivalent of 150 megawatt biomass power station. Not a major one, but still pretty big. Yes, and in 2022, SCA sold the equivalent of 2 terawatt-hour, equivalent to 2,000 gigawatt-hour of biomass energy in the form of wood pellets and residues to external customers. SCA operates 4 pellet plants with a combined capacity of 241,000 tons a year. Härnösand, Tundal, Stugun, and Rundvik's pellet plants. The Härnösand pellet plant is certified by Sustainable Biomass Program, SBP. And according to its supply base audit, it sources sawmills residues from 5 to 10 sawmills using wood from the wood nation states of Sweden, Finland, and Norway. And yet again, here it's further specification of how much of this wood is sourced from indigenous land needs to be clarified. Yes, so SCA holds 9% of shares in and supplies the wood to a 100,000 tons a year pellet plant operated by Luleå Energi. According to the supply base report that accompanies their Sustainable Biomass Program, SBP, the wood is made from sawmills residues from 10 to 12 sawmills using wood from Sweden and Finland. And also here, further clarification needs to be made regarding if this wood is coming from indigenous territory. Yeah. So SCA is co-investing in a biofuel refinery, which is being built jointly with the oil company ST1 in Gothenburg. The refinery, which is under construction, is meant to produce biofuels and biofuels for cars and also for aviation. SCA will supply tall oil, which is a byproduct of pulp production. Tall oil is in high demand by the chemical industry, so this might lead to that the chemical industry might replace tall oil with fossil fuels. And so something else we found is that SCA is trying to develop transport biofuel, specifically at the new expanded Östrand pulp mill. The biofuel will be both from black liquor or perhaps also tall oil. We're not 100% sure yet. And sourced from solid biomass such as sawdust and bark. So SCA admits that the technology for using solid biomass for transport biofuels is still under development. But Biofuel Watch, according to our research, we suggest that these technological successes are quite unlikely to happen in the near future. But it's clear that SCA is trying to open up a new big market, not just for tall oil, but also for solid wood. So yeah, and lastly, it's worth mentioning that that this is how the Swedish forestry industry looks like. This is how most of SCA's forestry management looks like. It's according to the so-called Swedish forestry model. And as you can see, when they clear cut, they only leave small areas of so-called retained areas. And this is according to this Swedish forestry model and to how SCA operates, should be enough for biodiversity to still exist. But it's quite clear that on these kind of lands, biodiversity cannot exist. And here's another photograph showing that. Yeah, that's all for me. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Marina. Has anybody got, that was great. Yeah, has anybody got any understanding or technical questions to Marina right now? If you have a question, you can go to reactions and go to raise your hand. No? Okay, great. In that case, I'm going to hand over to Varpu Sairinen, and Varpu is the coordinator of the Stop Fake Renewables campaign in Finland, and she is also the co-coordinator of the EPN Biomass Working Group. Yeah, she's been working for this report, for this webinar and forthcoming report, she's been working on studying, trying to answer the same questions as Marina has, but for Finland. So over to you, Varpu.
Thank you. I will also share my screen. My presentation has a bit different form, but doesn't matter. I'm going to tell first about just how the biomass industry, especially the using of biomass energy, has been growing hugely in Finland during the last 20 years about. And then go through the impacts of that, and then how it links to the pulp industry. So this is from this picture is from an energy wood terminal, and all this wood is waiting to be crushed for energy. This is near Tampere, and we have a lot more of similar pictures from all around Finland. Finland is one of the most woody biomass dependent countries in Europe when it comes to energy production, or biomass dependent countries in general. 30% of the energy consumed in Finland was in 2021 produced by burning biomass. And in the same year, 70% from the renewable energy came from burning biomass. So it has a huge importance for the energy system in Finland. Burning biomass has also been the biggest single source of energy in Finland since 2012. And it's bigger than the amount of energy produced with oil, coal, and gas. Since 2000, the use of woody biomass for energy grew from 74.7 terawatt hours to 111.7 terawatt hours in 2021. And the last 15 years, the use of biomass for energy purposes has been bigger than the use of biomass for products. So talking about the biomass that they harvest yearly from the forests. In 2021, 59% of all the forest biomass that they harvested ended up being burned for energy, and that includes the byproduct. But still, when you think about Finland as being the country where a lot of wood products, pulp, paper, timber is coming from, still more than half of the wood is being burned. See, can't get further somehow. Don't know what's going on. We go. Here is just a graph on where you can see how the energy developments have been. So the yellow line here is the wood fuels, and you see on the lower level you have the hydropower has been quite stable. Peat luckily going down a bit, but not still gone. Wind power has started to rise, especially last year's. Oil is going down, gas is going down. Almost everything except a tiny bit of nuclear energy has been going up. But the biggest rise or increase has definitely been with wood fuels. Yeah, what is being burned? Main sources for biomass energy were black liquor and solid wood fuels like bark, sawdust, recycled wood, and forest chips. About half of the energy. And of course, black liquor is something that is being is a side product of pulp industry. So that is also, of course, something that the pulp and paper industry especially uses in energy production. And even though the biomass energy has been claiming that they only burn bark and industrial byproducts like black liquor, the biggest increase in the source of biomass for energy has come from forest chips. So wood that has been harvested straight from the forest to be burned. So includes, I can't come in. That includes thinning waste, harvesting residues like branches and stems, solid trunk wood and dry trunk wood, upstanding dry trunk wood mainly. And last years, more than 50% of the forest chips has been made from thinning waste, which means small diagram trees that are being harvested from forests or young forests that they are thinning to get the forests grow faster and bigger for the pulp industry. So it's mainly from industrial forests. And there is a claim by the industry, or by the pulp and paper industry, and also the whole forestry industry, that there is a backlog in Finland in thinning. So that's why we need to log a lot, but there's or do a lot of thinnings. But there's also been lately a lot of scandals coming up that they actually do too much thinning, basically. So they get too much wood out of the forests when they do the thinnings. Also breaking the law by it. But well, that's again a law that they don't really follow always. One thing that has been really also visible, also in our visits to energy wood terminals where they store the wood, is that they have started to use more and more also solid trunk wood and upright dry trunk wood that according to cascading principle, which is the principle that you should always use the wood for the most valuable and most long-lasting products. According to that principle, the trees should have been left either could have been used for other purposes or should have been left to the forest, also according to the own rules of the forestry industry. Because we saw a lot of, for example, old aspens in the piles, and that is something that is really valuable for the biodiversity in Finland. And here you can see kind of how the use of solid wood fuel has been changing. So you see that the small-sized trees in forest chips has been growing. Also, the let's see, the industrial chips, logging residues, that's all being used more and more. And if you look at then to the byproducts, it's also been growing, but not in the same amounts. And especially, the small-sized trees is really visible here. Where does the wood come from then? Well, in Finland, in comparison to some other countries in Europe where there are loggings being done purely for energy wood, in Finland, most energy wood is not specifically grown, and there are not many loggings being done purely for the energy use. But there's when a logging is being done, especially if it's a bigger logging, then the kind of the trees and the forest products or the biomass gets sorted at the spot and then goes to different direction. Part goes to timber production, part for pulp, part for biomass. But the percentage of wood that ends up being burned for energy instead of used for the production of wood products has been increasing steadily the last 15 years. This is in Finnish, but the big blob, the brown one, is the energy use of wood. Down the lighter orange is timber. The pink one is paper. Blue one is cardboard. And the pulp is the green one, especially the export of pulp. Did I miss something? Well, you get the picture in any way. Again, energy use has been growing. Let's see. Facts. Well, Finland, here are a couple of examples of valuable forests being logged down. Both of the pictures are from Greenpeace, and they both are from areas that had been pointed out as having forest values, valuable biodiversity, and they still got logged down. According to the last assessment in Finland, every 9th of all assessed species is now endangered, and most of them are species that need old forests as their habitat. Nevertheless, only 6% of the Finnish forests are protected, and there are disputes about logging and logging plans of natural and old-growth forests between the forest industry and the environmental movement and organizations going on every year several times. Also, diminishing carbon sinks is one of the big things that has been coming up lately. In 2022, there were news that shook the nation in Finland. The Finnish National Resources Institute announced that the land use sector, which is called the LULUCF, that includes the forest sector and also the whole land use, and also the sector that formed the base for the Finnish climate policy, had become an emission source instead of being a sink for the first time ever. And even though the forest sector itself stayed a carbon sink, the change happened mainly because of excessive logging and forest growing rate slowing down. So it's a bit tricky, but the forest sector was kind of forming the big sink. And even though that sink stayed a sink, it went so much down that it affected the whole land use sector, and basically just crushed the dreams of the Finnish government that was kind of hoping to get Finland carbon neutral with using that sink. And of course, it was a surprise. It wasn't a surprise for the scientific community, but the politicians were really flabbergasted, and yeah, still are kind of not recovered totally. And many see the move from burning fossil fuels to burning biomass for energy as one of the big reasons for both the change as well as the surprise. As we know that the emissions from burning biomass are not visible in the place where the fossil fuel emissions are visible, but they are really visible in the land use sector when forests and forests as carbon sinks and carbon sequesters diminish and lose their value as a sink in a way. One more effect is the affected the local communities, which is of course again in Finland tricky, as most forests are largely owned by private owners and the state of Finland. So on one hand, small forest owners do get extra income from selling their wood, and quite some people in the countryside especially are dependent on forestry for their income. But on the other hand, of course, the logging and forestry in general affects the other uses of forestry, like berry mushroom picking, tourism, recreation, reindeer herding. And especially in Lapland, in Sapmi areas, the reindeer herders and forest owners have been facing each other a lot on many occasions, as loggings destroy and chop traditional grazing grounds. And in the picture, you can see an old grazing ground of reindeer in Sapmi area in Inari. And as you can see, it's not forest anymore. It's really dry, and it's not something where the reindeer can find their shelter or their food anymore as they used to. How does the pulp and paper industry fit in? The biggest users of biomass energy is the industry, and within the industry, the pulp and paper industry, and especially pulp industry is very energy intensive. In 2021, the forest industry used 60% of the energy used in manufacturing in Finland. The paper and pulp industry alone used 25% of the energy produced in Finland and 25% of the electricity. In Finland, of course, heat is also something that is produced a lot, so hence the difference. But it's a quarter of all the energy in Finland is being used by the paper and pulp industry. You can also see the kind of what I said about 60% of all the energy used in manufacturing goes to forestry. And here is how the pulp and paper industry's use of biomass energy has, or energy in general, has developed during the last years. You can see that the wood fuels have been growing, while fossil fuels, luckily, of course, have been going down, and peat as well. But there's hardly any other energy, even though there's some other energy being used, but it's still the biggest share is definitely wood fuels. So almost 2/3 of the renewable energy is connected to forestry, and the forestry industry is by far the largest user and producer of bioenergy in Finland. Why is it connected is, of course, where the wood comes from, the industry. also for other users. As we in Finland, we have a lot of, for example, district heating producers that produce heat for housing, but the wood, of course, comes from forest industry. The goal of, I see that it's a bit confusing here, the goal of the industry, so that's more the paper and pulp industry, sorry, need to change this. But the goal of the paper and pulp industry is to get 90% of the energy they use from renewable sources by 2025. And they are really close to that. 88% of the factory fuels were already from renewable sources in 2021. That was mainly biomass. They are a major producer. They produce most of the companies that I researched produce already almost all of their energy by themselves. My research looked into the production of energy by the big three, the UPM, Metsä Group, and Stora Enso, which are the biggest paper and pulp companies in Finland, and probably, well, in the top 5 or top 10 in the world as well. Most of the energy they produce is being used in the pulp, paper, and other mills they have. They have a lot of industrial areas where they have several mills in one place, but also separate mills, including cardboard, veneer, sawmills, pulp and paper, and others. They use it for their own company mills, but also sell more and more energy and heat to the general grid. So conclusions. The research still needs to go on a bit, because we are even though we know that the pulp industry plays a major role in the Finnish energy system and in the increasing use of biomass energy. We still need to kind of investigate the exact extent of whether they use mainly black liquor and other byproducts, or whether they use also really wood chips from the forests. We found out, for example, that one of the big ones that's just opened in Finland is mainly using black liquor, but then again, they are logging down half of Lapland for their pulp and paper production. So then they obviously have enough black liquor there as well for energy. They also 250% self-sufficient, so there's a lot of energy going also to the grid. But yeah, I'm kind of going out of my papers. But yeah, the main thing is that without the pulp and paper industry, the Finnish energy use and the energy system would look really different. We would have a lot less energy in general needed, or we would need a lot less energy, which would mean, of course, that we would also need a lot less biomass energy. And if you look at the politics and how Finland has been a strong lobbyist for the business as usual model at the EU level, every time when EU has tried to tighten the rules around, for example, giving financial incentives to biomass energy producers, it does give an indication that the forestry sector is also benefiting from those subsidies and from the system. In comparison to other countries, also the kind of the pulp and paper sector, especially, but also the forest sector in general has been really quiet about the subsidies. So
sorry, Varpu, just looking at the time. Do you think we could finish in a minute or so? Sorry, it's really interesting.
I'm finishing my sentence, then I'm done. So yeah, we do think that there is definitely something going on. We just don't know exactly yet how to find the information specifically regarding the pulp and paper industry and their woody biomass use, so the forest biomass use. And now I'm done. Thanks.
Thank you. That was great. Thanks, Varpu. Yeah. Any clarifying technical questions to Varpu? No, it seems. In that case, we'll go to our last presentation, Oliver Munnion. Oliver is working as a freelance researcher on forests and biomass. He's been working on various pieces of work, done various pieces of work with Biofuel Watch and also with Portuguese NGOs. And his is the only case study that has already been published, and I've put the link into the chat. So over to you, Ollie.
Thanks very much, Almuth. Hopefully you can all see my screen, my presentation. So yeah, my name's Oliver Munnion, and I'm going to discuss today about the links between the pulp and paper sector and big biomass developments in Portugal. I'm based in central Portugal, and as Almuth's already said, Biofuel Watch and EPN and 3 Portuguese NGOs published a case study earlier this year called Piling on the Pressure, which really details a lot of what I'm going to talk about in my presentations based on this case study. So yeah, if you would like to read the full thing, which you're very welcome to, we definitely encourage you to. The link's there, and I'll have to put it in the chat as well. So yeah, the Portuguese pulp and paper industry is dominated by 2 big companies. So that's the Navigator company and Altri. Altri have a subsidiary, Greenvolt, which basically manages their electricity-only biomass power stations. But since Greenvolt's a subsidiary, we sort of consider it, part of Altri's industrial complexes. So between Navigator company and Altri, they control about, or they produce about 2/3 of the biomass electricity in Portugal each year. There's also a smaller producer, DS Smith, which is a big pulp and paper company, but they've only got 1 pulp mill in Portugal. But yeah, so we're really talking about the Navigator and Altri as being the dominant force in the biomass market in Portugal. Both of these companies have made record profits in recent years, and biomass electricity is a contributing factor to that, mostly through the generous subsidy scheme that the Portuguese government has for biomass electricity. So the pulp sector also operates more than half of the electricity-only biomass power capacity. So in particular, the 2 biggest electricity-only plants, which are the ones on the left of the chart with the biggest smokestacks, they're operated by Greenvolt or Altri. And then some of the smaller ones are also operated by pulp companies. But the important thing to remember about these ones is that all of the electricity they produce is exported to the grid, and none of it is used by the pulp mills themselves. So in this image, you can see the location of Portugal's 7 pulp mills and the power stations associated with those pulp mills that burn woody biomass. So there are 7 electricity-only power stations, and there's 5 CHP, which is combined heat and power plants. Between them, they burn almost 3 million tons of woody biomass a year, and over half of that comes directly from forestry operations. So it's primary biomass that has to be brought into the mill additionally in order to burn. So subsidies for biomass electricity and the pulp companies' own emissions reduction targets are basically decoupling biomass burning at pulp mills from being reliant on industrial byproducts. So as has already been alluded to previously, pulp mills may have been dependent on burning black liquor, burning bark, but increasingly, especially as fossil gas capacity is replaced, more and more woody biomass is being burnt. So yeah, the 2 most important trends in Portugal are for electricity-only power stations to be built alongside pulp mills, as I've discussed, and for CHP plants that are powered by biomass to replace fossil gas plants that they used to have on site. I'll just focus on two in particular, two of the most important recent developments. They're side by side, they're right next to each other. One is the Navigator company's new CHP plant in Figueira da Foz, and the other one is Altrio Greenvolt's electricity-only plant next door, so on the coast of Portugal in central Portugal. First of all, we'll look at the Altrio Greenvolt's power station. So this is called Figueira da Foz 2, and it's associated with the Selby pulp mill. It's inside the Selby pulp mill complex. It's a 34.5 megawatt electricity only power station, which is the biggest in Portugal. In 2021, it burned almost 500,000 tons of primary woody biomass. Its net efficiency, so its overall efficiency, is around 22%, which is so inefficient, really inefficient. And part of the reason for that is that although it's considered a new power station, it's actually a converted old boiler that was already on site and had been decommissioned previously. This plant was financed through 50 million euros worth of green bonds, which were issued by the company. And then, thousands of investors would have contributed to that. And, green bonds are an increasingly important way for these kinds of developments to be financed these days. The second one that's important to look at is the Navigator company's new boiler, also at Figueira da Foz, so next door. And this is a 131 megawatt CHP plant that replaced fossil gas, burns around 250,000 tons of primary woody biomass a year, and then around 300,000 tons of bark and other pulp mill byproducts. So this one's also very dependent, as you can see, on primary biomass. This was a flagship decarbonisation project that the Navigator company said reduced its overall emissions, so the emissions of the whole company, by 30% in 2021. 28 million euros of the finance for this boiler were provided by the European Investment Bank, which again is financing a lot of these kinds of developments. So I just want to go through three industry myths that really underpin woody biomass burning at pulp mills and the support that they receive both through biomass electricity subsidies and so-called green finance. So the first is that they only burn waste wood, and there's loads of it to burn. The second is that it helps to reduce the risk of forest fires or wildfires. And the third one is that it's good for the climate. So first of all, I'd like to make it clear that in the EU and in Portugal, the distinction between waste or residual woody biomass and higher value wood is basically meaningless. So existing legislation and the fact that sort of monitoring and enforcement is totally inadequate basically means that anything can be classed as waste wood or residual, and obviously companies take advantage of this. But when it comes to thinking about healthy forests, healthy soils, climate impacts, it doesn't really matter what kind of wood it is that's being burned, right? All of this wood is important. But for the sake of it, what we did was we compared what's theoretically available in Portugal as residues to current demand. So this figure we've got on the left of the 1.5 million tons availability of economically viable primary woody biomass comes from various different sources, mostly government, but all published data. Seems like a reasonable estimate. And then the middle graph is the current consumption. So this is the wood pellet industry, but also from biomass power stations. In order to be eligible for subsidies in Portugal, theoretically, you can only burn waste wood, or at least you can't burn higher value wood. But this is the current demand. And as you can see, it far outstrips what is the technical availability of residues. And then if you look at what's likely to happen in future with plans for increased biomass capacity, plans for increasing scale of the wood pellet industry, you can see that the picture only gets worse. So basically it has to be the case that the industry is using higher value wood. And even if all of the available residues are being burned for energy, they must be using even higher value wood at many stages of the process. We also need to talk about eucalyptus, since most of the primary woody biomass that's burned at pulp mills is from eucalyptus plantations. So Portugal has the highest proportion of eucalyptus anywhere in the world, and the impacts are really wide-ranging. So in particular, it puts a really big strain on water resources. It's also a disaster in terms of biodiversity, which is why it's often called a green desert rather than a plantation or a forest. Eucalyptus also burns really readily. and it's like a major underlying factor in Portugal's serious problems with wildfires. Which brings me to the second myth, that burning woody biomass reduces the risk of fire. So the logic here is that reducing fuel load in forestry areas, basically by clearing up after forestry operations, helps to reduce the risk of fire. It stops them being able to spread so fast and at such intensity. So if this were true, you would expect to see a reduction in burned areas in Portugal, but also a reduction in the proportion that forestry areas account for the sort of total proportion of burnt areas, compared to other land uses like unmanaged forests or agricultural areas. But that's not what's been. So since 2007, there were basically a series of public tenders since 2007 for new biomass electricity capacity, and the capacity has almost doubled since then. So this is the kind of period of time that we're really interested in. So the total area burned has gone up. So that's the yellow bars and the dashed yellow trend line. And you can see there was also a really big spike in 2017. So you might remember seeing on the news what happened in Portugal in 2017 when there were the worst fires in living memory. Over 100 people died. There was like 5% of Portugal's land area burned. So the other important thing to look at in this chart is the green line and the green dashed line, which is the proportion of fires affecting forestry areas. So that has also gone up in the same time period, such that now around 50% or even sometimes more than 50% of the area burned each year is forestry. So, burning biomass at this scale clearly isn't helping the situation. In fact, the opposite is true. What's happening is that forestry areas are becoming overexploited. More and more material is being removed, which harms soil health, leads to desertification, and only makes fire risk increase, basically. So the final myth, I'm sure I don't need to go into this in much detail now, but the point that I mainly want to make is that even if you're burning what could be classed as genuine residual biomass, it's still bad for the climate. So two recent studies in the US highlight this. One looked at burning thinnings from pine plantations, and found that the negative impact on the climate lasts for more than 40 years. Another one looked at the net emissions impact of burning residual biomass, and it found that after a 10-year period, up to 95% of the carbon in the biomass would still be in the ground and not in the atmosphere if it had been left to decay and not been burned. So due to the urgency of the climate crisis, we just don't have time to wait for carbon debts to be paid back, even if we're talking about short rotation species like eucalyptus. So just to end, what needs to happen? In the case study, we go into this in much more detail, but I'll just run through a few important points quickly now. So first of all, we really need an immediate moratorium on new biomass electricity capacity. No more biomass power stations. The fastest way to achieve that would be to end subsidies for biomass electricity. We need to cap what's being burnt at pulp mills so that primary biomass isn't being used, only secondary can be used for energy generation. Obviously, we basically need to redirect the subsidies that were going to biomass electricity towards good stuff, or stuff that actually helps the climate. And then finally, and more broadly, there's a growing movement in Portugal that really wants to reduce the scale of eucalyptus plantations. The current target that's been focused on is by at least 50%. It probably needs to be more than that, but we also need to focus on what's achievable. So that's also a really important thing to focus on. Thank you very much, and obviously happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much, Oliver. So we've got a little bit of time for broader questions, but are there any very specific clarifying ones about Portugal just now? No. So yes, put up, please. Thanks all the speakers. can you all, if you would like to raise something, please put up your hands. Keep comments and questions very short, please, so others have a chance to, if several people want to say something. You can just put your video on. I'm actually, shall I stop? I'm gonna stop recording now. Okay.